Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Unleashing Potentials podcast. So, joining me today is Sandy Gross. You're close to Washington, you were saying earlier.
Yeah, I'm in the Seattle area. Kind of more on the suburby side across the lake from the main city. So it's kind of an interesting mix of mountains and trees, and yet in the middle of the city, and it's a beautiful place to be.
That's awesome. Yeah. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on. I really appreciate all the work you're doing and connecting women all over the world with each other. It's a wonderful thing you're doing.
Thank you so much. And to start, can you tell us more about you and what you do?
Oh, absolutely. So I was in the tech industry for 25 years, and for a long time I was successful enough, and there was always something that I needed to fix, something that I was being mentored or coached into doing, and it was always about being different than who I actually was. And sure, there were things I had to learn, there were ways I needed to grow, but a lot of it, now that I look back, a lot of it was being bullied into looking, acting, and thinking like the people who had come before me. And in the tech industry, that is mostly white, Chinese, and Indian people. So anybody outside of that dynamic just didn't really fit. Because I'm a white woman, I could slip through a lot of the things that were shaped by my integration in whiteness and white culture. I'm also Indigenous. I'm a Cherokee and Delaware Tribe of Indian citizen. But that didn't really come into play a lot of work because I didn't talk about it. And so I finally left the tech industry when I reported harassment. It wasn't the harassment itself that was a problem. It was more, once I reported one of the more egregious instances of harassment, I started looking more closely at everything that had been in my way. And I looked at all the times I tried to fix myself and realized there's nothing wrong with me. There's nothing wrong with most women in the tech industry or anywhere else. But the world wants to tell us there's something wrong with us, that it's our fault, that we're not meeting some impossible standard, some set of white male bars. And one of the things that really made me realize that was coming into a meeting and saying, hey, I have 2 women candidates for our open position. And my manager, like the instant it was out of his mouth, he said, we're not going to lower the bar just because they're women. And what he meant was the bar is shaped like a white man, and these women, just in his mind, weren't going to fit through that bar. So lowering the bar is just code for, you don't fit our perception of what a cisgender white man would look like. And so now I left the tech industry. I left a high-paying job. I left job security and friends and coworkers I liked, a job where I really liked the things I was doing. And I went through a couple of years of depression. I went through a whole bunch of issues. And now, because I had a bunch of coaches along the way who were able to help me unwind that and get back and choose a new path forward, I want to go back to women who are still in the tech industry and be there for them, offer them the things that I didn't have available to me. And so now I help women in tech who feel left behind for whatever reason really regain their confidence, set boundaries that help them get what they want and block out what they don't want, and really own their value so they can raise their voice and say, this is what I deserve, and then get that.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that, because you're shedding light on an issue that's been going on for so long. And I love that you're very brave to say it the way you say it without apologizing for it, right? The colored thing, it's something that's been going on for a while, whether it's a Black woman or white woman. As a Black woman, I think sometimes we think that white people don't suffer, which I never choose to see it that way. I think there's suffering among all races. And I love your authenticity to share what it is like, what it was like for you. Because you're right, for so long, I believe women were told to fit in certain places based on their gender. And the tech department would be a big one. That's why I'm excited to have you on to share more about that.
Yeah, thank you. And being authentic is a big thing. And all of the tech companies made a big deal over the last couple of years until the layoffs started December, January
Mhm.
more recently made a big deal about, oh, we've changed, George Floyd changed us, the pandemic changed us. And yet here, as they started doing the latest round of layoffs, which have really devastated the tech industry, we see that they're laying off their DEI teams in droves. They're laying off far more Hispanic women than anyone else. Women in general are way more impacted than anyone else, and the return to office requirements really impact anybody who faces racialized or gendered harassment at work, because it's much safer to be working remotely than it is in the office for many of us. So the tech
Mhm.
industry is really saying one thing and doing something else.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. And whenever we come forward with those issues as women, they see us as crazy or different or not making sense. When really we're making perfect sense when we say what we want to say and how it's feeling. What would you like to see change within the tech industry?
I would like to see the tech industry and all sorts of business environments, but I'm most familiar with the tech industry. I'd like to see the tech industry really step back and look at the things they need to do to make their work culture safe.
Mm,
And psychological safety, there's a million studies that show why it's so important for people to be truly productive at work. And right now, so many tech environments are safest for cisgender straight white men, and they're less safe to some degree for everyone else. And there are some of us who can pretend. I pretended for a long time to fit in. And part of it is my natural way of being is more in alignment with the stereotypes for white men. I am very hyper logical. Or at least until I started going to therapy and realized a lot of that was a trauma response, and have worked through some of it. So there are ways that I fit in. There are studies that show somewhere between 10 and 20% of women can both show up as very feminine and fit into a male culture, and the rest of us can't. Or we
mm,
can't without feeling inauthentic or constantly being twisted up. So I'd like to see a focus on creating psychological safety as an imperative for the companies, where they have to do that first. And I'd like them to look beyond just, oh, we're going to bring in a DEI expert who's going to do some training and we're done. I want them to change it where every single person, every individual contributor, every manager, every C-suite person is truly involved on a daily basis with efforts to make it a safer, more equitable workplace. And that will make companies more profitable. We know that when you have well-managed teams that are racially diverse, they strongly outperform the least racially diverse companies. Gender diversity is also up there, but racial diversity has a higher return than gender diversity does. And it is about having management that recognizes that this slows teams down in the beginning, because you have to work through the relationship building. You have to maintain that psychological safety. And that's a lot of work. It takes a lot of skills that a lot of managers don't have. And when you do that, companies get more innovative. They get more creative about how they do everything. They get more creative about how products are delivered and what the end product actually is. And
mhm.
that is why these businesses are more profitable in the long run. So if they want to stay in business, they really need to step back and embrace true equity, not hiring somebody at half the salary of people on the engineering teams and putting all the responsibilities with none of the ability to make changes on one person.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. And I think most companies, it depends on the company, they do hire people from different cultures and race as a way of them not looking bad, that they accept it. When really on the inside, if you go on the inside, that's not the case at all. Yeah, I love that you talked about workplace harassment because, oh my, that itself is a full pandemic and it hasn't stopped. I don't know when it will stop. I haven't worked with people in a while, but when I did face racial discrimination and harassment, and it was by a leader in the group that I was working in. Right? It's happening everywhere, everywhere, and every day it's in the news among, I would say, military or police officers. You hear it, but what is being done about it to solve that issue?
Yeah. And I think there's a whole lot going on where you think about harassment. When I tell people I've been harassed, they're like, oh, what the lawyer saying? How much money did you get? And I'm like, the lawyers were of no use and I didn't get any money. And, the average payout, according to a couple of lawyers I talked to, is about a month's salary. So that's not even enough time to go find another job. And now you're permanently marked as somebody who, if you are authentic and say what really happened at your last job, the new company is going to say that's too much risk. We're not going to hire you. Or you're being inauthentic, and interviewers will pick up on it and go, well, you're not telling the whole truth about why you left. So you're in a really bad position. I also think a lot of people think about harassment as what you see in some of the movies where it's about some sort of dating issue and people broke up and they got in a fight, and that's what harassment is. And that's not what it is. It's not the type of harassment I faced. And a lot of people think of it as sexual harassment, where they think of sex as being an act and not a noun. So they think of it as it was an act of two people having sex or somebody wanting to have sex, as opposed to really being about gender. It's something where there was an expectation of men, and then that same expectation was applied to women, non-binary people, and that it didn't fit. And the harassment came out of that. And then even bigger, people don't think about the racialized harassment. They don't call it harassment. HR will. HR knows what the anti-harassment policy is, but the average person doesn't even think to report it, because we have this weird idea of sex-based harassment as the only thing we call harassment.
Mhm. Oh, man, you're so right when it comes to that. Because for those of us who have experienced harassment of many different forms, we do know it has nothing to do with sexual contact. It does, but there's more to it than that. It could be the way someone look at you, talk to you. Someone can look at you in a sexual way. That's a form of harassment because they're breaching your space and your privacy, your body. And I've had that happen to me all the time. I feel disgusted most of the time. Even married men or whoever it may be can look at someone like they're just food, and then food they can digest and get rid of. It's just bleh. And it happens everywhere, everywhere. Um, so how are you teaching women when it comes to harassment in the workspace?
So a lot of it is about reframing. So a lot of women come to me and they're like, well, this thing happened and I don't know what to call it. I don't know if I can call it harassment. I'm like, let go of that. You don't have to name it something, right? So that's the first thing. You don't have to name it. You don't have to prove it. What you need to say is, how is it impacting me?
Mhm.
And how do I want to show up differently? So when there's somebody who is, you're thinking maybe this person's harassing me, just think, are they bullying me? So I like the switch to the word about being bullied.
Mhm.
And if there are some groups like End Workplace Abuse and Dignity Together that really focus on workplace bullying and trying to get some laws changed around that. So some people who are interested in that, people will externalize that feeling and they'll want to do advocacy for other people. I went through a long period of that. And so you can do that. You can join some of these groups that are trying to change the laws and make them more focused on what we actually need. But internally, what we can do is think about what happens when this person shows up. So you've named somebody as this person, I'm uncomfortable around them. Okay, what do you want to happen in your next interaction with them? Okay, how do you want to feel internally? Do you want to feel like you want to listen to that instinct that says something's wrong? And a lot of times our instinct, our coping skill that's been developed over years is to run or to fight. So we get in an argument with that person if our fight instinct is coming up, or we get into well, let me avoid this. I went off this important project and onto the least impactful project. And so what we can do instead is say, okay, I'm going to listen to my instinct. I'm going to listen to that internal dragon.
Mhm.
It's a valid instinct.
Mhm.
And what I'm going to do is decide in that moment how I'm going to interpret it. So that's where the choice comes in, that you're going to think about, okay, they did that thing. That's on them. That is not a reflection of me. I am confident that I'm interpreting that signal correctly, but I don't have to follow the action I've always done before. And I get to choose. And often the choosing is about a boundary. And you can think about it in terms of Well, normally when this happens, I just kind of melt back into the background and don't respond, or I get into some argument where it ends up with the manager calling me into the office later and saying, don't do that again. Next time this happens, I'm going to access this feeling, find a tool that helps you access it, breathing or doodling or whatever it may be, and then choose what you're going to do and then practice it. So you might choose to say, the next time that happens, I'm going to turn around and ask them what they mean when they say that. Or next time that happens, I'm going to turn around and say, that's interesting. And right now we're focused on this. I'm going to continue talking on this. You might think I'm going to enlist an ally. I had a coworker call me up once after a meeting and said, every single meeting, this one guy in the room always interrupts you, cuts you off, tries to detract from the meeting. And he said, what do you want me to do? And I was like, oh, thank you. I said, every time he does that, can you just say Cindy's talking? And so he started doing it. And it was my project. I was running the meeting, and I had this man who was just on my side and saying, no, let Cindy finish her thought. So find those allies.
Oh wow, that's so cool. The shift in the mindset of it. You were talking about being bullied. When people think of bullying, they refer to high school kids bickering or just kids bickering. When really we do it as adults all the time. We just do it in a sneakier way for people not to really see what we're doing. But those of us who are very attentive, we pick it up. We know what's up when people do that. And you brought up boundaries. I talked about boundaries on the podcast, and it's something I keep talking about because just because we know what it means doesn't mean we actually do it. Give me a few scenarios of how you would help a client set healthy boundaries.
So one thing to think about is sometimes people will get up on things like, is this boundary healthy? Or is this boundary good enough? Or is this boundary going to be allowed? I tend to think in terms of, is this boundary useful to me right now? And then think about, how is it serving me and how is it helping me be more authentic? Because when I get to be more authentic, people understand me better and their actions will change around me if they're people I want to stay in relationship with. So when you think about a boundary, first think about the situations where it comes up. And a lot of people are trying to control the other person. I want the bully. And with the people I'm working with, I'm usually working with women, and it's usually a man that they're having a struggle with. So I'm just going to use those pronouns. So when he does this, I want him to stop. When he does this, I want my manager to make the bad man go away. I want my manager to punish the bad man. Okay. In a perfect world, somebody would go talk to the bully and say, you can't do that. That's not allowed here. Maybe you can make that happen, but that's not a boundary. Right. So when you think about a boundary, it's about, what am I going to do? And a lot of that has to do with really getting down to the underlying value that's being violated. And quite often the value is something around integrity or achievement or, whatever matters the most to you. And then you can latch onto that. And so say, for example, it's the value of integrity that's being violated. Then instead of saying, I have to have 100 boundaries because there's these 100 situations that have come up, what you can say is, my boundary is, when I feel this sensation that I've identified as my integrity is being violated, now I know to take 3 deep breaths and, list of things, whatever it is we decide to do. And it's going to be unique to everyone. So stop looking for a checklist, really go deep, find that value, and then work out from that. And usually we can have just 1 or 2 boundaries. Some are going to be internal. You don't have to tell anybody. Some you'll need to communicate to people. And you'll have to decide how rigid and flexible each one is. And in the end, what you're doing is saying, this is what I need in order to operate in this environment. I deserve to have what I need in order to do what I need to do. And I'm going to stand firm. I may negotiate around the edges or say, oh, well, that's interesting. Actually, you came up with a way that still feels good and isn't violating my integrity. I'm okay with that variation, but I'm not okay with modifying this thing over there.
Yeah, you're right. And I think some of us need to redefine what our boundaries are. Often we see boundaries as a bad thing. when really it's a healthy thing. And just like water is healthy, you need food to survive. Why can't we have boundaries put into place for us to thrive in this life? And most people think it's a wall that we put up. I mean, it depends on how people look at it, but a boundaries are not bad. It's not a wall that we put up that never comes down. It's a limit that people can go or not go. And so many of us, we do struggle with rigid boundaries or boundaries in general. We don't want to hurt people's feelings. We definitely don't want to lose our jobs, especially in this time we're living in right now. I'm telling you, everything is so expensive. My rent went up, food went up. People put up with crap at work just to feed their families. And it's not okay for them to put up with that much to make a living and to live. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of misconceptions around what a boundary is, whether you're a good person if you have boundaries, and a lot of that is gendered and racialized as well. So the expectations of women are that we fulfill other people's needs and that we're considered selfish if we set boundaries, and we have to let go of that. I mean, it is actually easier to be around people who tell us what their boundaries are. It is easier to be in relationship with somebody who tells us, I need this, I like this, I don't like that. And you get to decide as an individual which things are negotiable and which things aren't. And you know, you're right about the wall. A lot of people think of the boundary as a wall, and I really love Yasmin Cheyenne's book, The Sugar Jar, because she talks about the analogy of your boundaries are like a sugar jar. And so if other people are constantly coming in and dipping into your sugar, the jar becomes empty very fast. And if you're constantly trying to pick up the sugar that they knocked onto the ground, you're coming back with energy that has been contaminated by other people, that's been contaminated by the environments around you. And so when you keep that sugar jar, the shape, size, you know, how full it is, you get to decide all those things, then that's where your joy comes from. That's where your energy stays at the levels you want it to stay. And you get to decide, out of all the things you can say yes to in the world, which ones are you going to say yes to? So I like that sugar jar analogy much better than walls.
Mm-hmm. You're right. And many people that are in power, they use that power to abuse others.
Mhm.
I've seen it firsthand. That's why I'm doing this alone. I don't like working with people. It's not that I don't like people. I just choose. It's a choice. And as you were talking, I put down achievements. Um, in society, we have to reach a certain expectation or achieve certain things to deem that we have value. Um, do you run into that with women who are doing the best that they can in the workplace, yet they are made to feel not good enough?
Yeah, so I there's a whole lot in that question. So yeah, there's a lot of women that I work with where they will list, you know, we usually do a values exercise to start with, and they will list achievement as one of their strong values. And that is an American thing. A lot of Americans say, you know, I'm probably Canadian as well, that achievement is the one thing. As long as I get stuff done, I'm a good person. As long as I get stuff done, I can sleep at night. As long as I do the stuff I need to do. And when people get to choose what they're achieving at, it's usually white men who get to choose that. Everybody else has to follow along. So when women say, I would like to achieve, but I want to do it differently, the world pushes back. And so in that whole overarching system that we have, there's this constant pressure to stay on a very narrow path. And then individuals around us are constantly enforcing that. And that's called microaggressions, but a lot of people don't like it because a micro sounds like it's a small thing. It's actually micro, and the microaggressions is talking about this is what happens on a regular daily basis, as opposed to the overall, like the entire American system of white supremacy, for example.
Mhm.
Uh, so when we try to achieve differently, or when we try to say, well, achievement sounds like seeking perfection, and I don't want to be seeking perfection. All the wellness people, everybody else is don't seek perfection. I'm not going to seek perfection. all of a sudden people are like, well, for the last 40 years, you were over here doing things perfectly and you didn't need any help. Now, wait, I have to pick up the slack and I don't want to. So when people come to me with that achiever value, quite often what we talk about is, okay, what are your other values? What are your other strengths? What are the other things going on for you? What if we were more balanced? What if it wasn't all about achieving all the time? What if you let go of some of that in a way that feels good and useful to you? And you exercise some of these other strengths and values a little bit more and give other people the opportunity to shine by achieving. And so there's an ideal and then there's a path to get there. And quite often we'll work on both. And they can be separate because the path to get there might involve some steps that don't feel really great. They might feel like compromising. Wait, I've decided I'm going to switch to this other thing. Why are you asking me to do all these in-between steps? Well, because you want the other people around you that you value to stay in relationship with you, either because you value them or because you have to because of your job. And so there may be steps along the way that may not be as comfortable, that may stretch your comfort zone or may feel like they're going back to your old way, but they may be a way to get you to where you really want to be.
Yeah, you're right. What is the Befriending Dragons? I'm curious to know more of that name.
So I think of our dragons as our instincts, our fears, our anxieties, our joy, all of the things that are going on inside of us. And so quite often what we'll say is, I want to avoid fear, or our culture tells us that, well, when you're afraid, just ignore it and go on and be brave instead. I say befriend that dragon, listen to the fear, stop and pay attention to what it's saying, and then separate what you're feeling or what you think it's telling you from how you have to act after that. And so when you're befriending all of these things that are going on inside, these emotions and these thoughts and these coping skills we've developed over the years, you open up all these perspectives, all these choices, and you can choose to be a different way. So Resmaa Menakem talks about trauma over time and removed from context begins to look like personality and culture and family traits. And that's a really good way to look at it. All of these personality tests, many of which were developed by people trying to do eugenics and prove white supremacy, like, they're interesting in that they show us how to think about other people don't think like me. And just because they don't think like me, that doesn't make them bad. But all of these personality tests also try to tell us that genetics are everything and the way we're born is everything, and therefore we have no choices. So if it's fine. Like, I know my Myers-Briggs score or letters or whatever you want to call it. I know all that. It's somewhat useful, but you can change these things. Don't ever believe they're unchangeable. And you don't have to change them because other people tell you to. It's because you want to grow how big you are. And the bigger you grow, the more chances there are that you'll find a place where you can truly be authentic. So if you're not great at public speaking, for example, you can say, that's my boundary, that's my personality, that's great. But this job over here that you want requires that once a quarter you speak in front of a group. Well, if you want that job, let's grow so that you feel authentic speaking to this group of people. That's not me saying you have to change your personality. That's saying you get the option to figure out how you're going to get there. And it's not set in stone that you have to be afraid of speaking or uncomfortable with speaking, or that you have to let those things stop you from doing that.
Yeah, you're right. And so many of us, we are made to look like we don't know what we're doing because we're not doing everything that everybody else is doing. We're not doing them the exact way they're doing them. Therefore, we don't know as much as they do. When I don't think that's close to the truth at all. Because what if we could embrace anybody's gifts and ability and where they are and to trust their instinct in what they're doing? I think we could learn so much from each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's just so much out there that somebody else found that this path forward worked for them. And then they try to say everybody else needs to follow this path as well. And sometimes they're saying it because it's easiest for them, or because they truly are inherently like they've chosen the path of a bully and they're going to stay on that path of a bully. And sometimes they're clueless about it. So there are plenty of times in my tech career where I was asked to mentor women, usually women who had just switched into a new role, or women who had just graduated from college and this was their first job in the industry. And looking back, I think quite often I was bullying them. I was telling them, in order to be successful, you have to do these things.
Mm.
And there's a certain amount of truth in that. That was how I was being successful. I was ignoring things. I was being emotionless. I was networking in a way that was acceptable to the other people on the teams that I was on. And so I was mentoring other people to do that. And in retrospect, I was bullying them because I was asking them to be less authentic. I was asking them to show up differently than they naturally would have shown up. Did it make them more successful? Possibly. And there are other ways I could have gone about it. There are other ways, that other outcomes that we could have looked for. But I was so busy and so certain that the way I had managed to squeeze through the white male bars was going to work for all the other women. And so therefore I was mentoring them into acting like I had. And where I ended up was a mess where for the last 4 years, I was so depressed I couldn't unload the dishwasher. That is not a state we want to mentor and coach other people into being.
Mhm. Well, thank you for sharing what you shared, because you're true to yourself, because you realize how it was impacting you and other people. I wish everyone could speak the truth like you, because it's okay to fail and to feel that we hurt other people, to acknowledge it and to do something about it. So I thank you for sharing that. Let's talk about the depression and how all of this can impact anybody mentally and physically. What are your thoughts on it?
I think there's a lot of preconceptions about depression. I remember when I was growing up, we would kind of talk in whispers that, well, my aunt's depressed and she's crazy and she does all this weird stuff, and therefore we're not going to go visit her. Like that was my childhood.
Mm.
And there's this stigma associated with it. There's this feeling that, well, she chose to be that way, and therefore she's just making our life difficult. And it's pathologizing it. And it's all about those of us who aren't experiencing the
Mhm.
mental health crisis, and how it's impacting us, and very little thought given to the person actually going through the mental health issue. And
Mhm.
so when I first started going to therapy, it was before I actually reported the harassment, but I started going and just hearing things like my therapist, who also used to work at Microsoft, she would tell me things like, I go in and say, this thing happened. And she'd know because she'd been in similar environments. And she'd go, well, that was sexist. And I go, no, it wasn't.
Mhm.
Like just this whole, and then I go, oh. And we did a lot of, well, what would you tell your friend if they came up and said this had happened? And I go, well, I would say that was sexist, or I would say that was harassment, but I wasn't naming it for myself. And when I started naming it for myself, I both felt better and worse. And eventually, after I reported the harassment, and there were other things going on as well, I just started having difficulties at work. And as far as everybody else saw, they're like, you're operating fine, you're getting average reviews, everything's great. My friends were like, oh, you're still going out to dinners. But what had slowly slipped away was the joy, and the effort to do anything was slowly increasing. And so when I started feeling like I just need to get away, I need to get away from everything, I need to like leave the country. Um, I said something to my therapist, and she's like, okay, I'll write you something to try to get paid leave instead of unpaid leave, which is made unnecessarily difficult, by the way the insurance companies do all that. They definitely do not want to pay out paid leave for depression. And she wrote on the form, severely impaired executive functioning. And I'm like, what's executive functioning? And what's wrong with my executive functioning, right? Like, because we hadn't talked about it in those terms.
Yeah.
And that's when I realized how bad things had gotten. That's when I realized that my inability to unload the dishwasher in one go that's executive functioning. My ability to plan out my day and follow through on a task list, that's executive functioning. my ability to do all the managing of everybody else's emotions that I had done my entire career or my entire life, but especially that is a large part of how a woman has to operate in the tech world. I have to manage other people's emotions. I have to tell the truth, but not so much truth that they get upset. I have to keep myself small enough that I don't intimidate them. I have to be the smartest person in the room, yet deprecate, be self-deprecating about it and go, well, I know that I know more about this than all of you, but you all are smarter than me and I'll defer the decision to you. That had become unmanageable for me. And that was my severely impaired executive functioning. And so I had to go back and say, well, what does this mean? And she's like, depression, right? You're depressed. And I'm like, but depression is this thing, and so we started working through, we did have to go back to my childhood. When was the first time you remember feeling like that? And that was painful. And it felt like, oh, this is why people hate therapists. I don't want to talk about what happened in my childhood. Well, how is that relevant? But it helps because then you can see that there was a point when things were different before that thing happened, before somebody did that thing to me. And then I could say, why did I react so strongly when this thing happened at work? Yes, it was bad, but my reaction, maybe like a bunch of other people wouldn't have reacted that way. Oh, because of things my dad did when I was a child, I learned I had to react that way because that was how I stayed safe. So it really is about a loss of joy, and it's different for everyone. But for me, it was an inability to do all the things I had once been proud of doing, to be the responsible person, to be the one who always followed through, to be the one who achieved everything, the one who finished the project and managed everybody else's emotions and all of those things. And realizing that not only can I not do that, but that's okay. Just because we live in a capitalistic society doesn't mean I have to constantly act it out in my entire life all the time. And then my way back, I remember getting in the shower. It was a couple years ago. So, I still was depressed for a long time after that. But I remember getting in the shower and the hot water hit my head and I went, oh my God, that feels good. And then I went, I don't remember the last time I thought that. I don't remember the last time I thought anything felt good. And so I started using that as a measure of, I'd get in the shower and I'd go, how do I feel? I don't feel. Okay, depression's bad today. Okay, I can feel the hot water. My depression's okay today. Oh, yes, it felt great when I stepped in the shower. My depression's fine today. Like it has receded a bit. And pretty soon, like in the last 6 months or so, it's gotten to where almost every day I feel the joy on a regular basis. So that was the path for me. And I still see a therapist twice a week. And that is another hidden cost of reporting harassment, because they'll give you their 1 month payout, which you may or may not get. And if you do, you have to sign away your ability to ever say anything bad about the company you once worked for. And then I am now paying years later for therapy a couple times a week.
Wow. So. Thank you for sharing. You're not alone. There are so many that are still suffering. They choose not to say anything, or they're ashamed of seeing therapists or going back from the beginning. Oh, hi, Kitty. My two kitties are sleeping.
Yeah. This is Goose, my big old orange kitty who likes to hop up in the middle of meetings and be petted while he's purring his head off. So
yeah, well, nice to have him being part of the interview. Yeah, pets are so great. They help with healing, don't they?
Oh yes, absolutely. I'll curl up. He and his brother will lay in a little kitty puddle on the bed, and I'll go lay down next to them and try to curl up around them without disturbing them. And that is another moment of joy in my life where I can just lay there and experience and go, oh, this is what life is supposed to be. Just lay here, and they wander around. They exhibit so many positive attributes. Goose just jumps up when he wants to be petted. When I've missed Zeke's dinner time, he's right in there going, meow, meow, feed me, mom. They ask for what they want and they're persistent until they get it. and
Mhm.
they're brothers, but they're so different in what they value. Goose will eat dry food all day long as I pet him.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
I wish more people felt like they could say, this is what I want. I know everybody else around me wants this other thing, but here's what I want. And I want it until I'm done wanting it, and I deserve it, and give it to me.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, you're right. I think pets sometimes give us things that medication can't or therapists can't. At least in my case, since I've gotten my pets, I'm less depressed. I'm like, this is new. This is nice. I like it. Yeah. Um, yeah. Oh boy. When it comes to depression, I don't know if you've heard any of my other episodes. I'm diagnosed with schizophrenia, PTSD, depression, anxiety, and whatever other labels they put on me. Um, it's hard. As you can see, anybody can be impacted by it. But we sometimes compare our pain to other people and expect them to feel the same way. When really they can feel, but it's not going to be the same because the trauma that they're bringing up is from a different place. Example, my childhood traumas may be different from yours, but it's trauma and it needs to be dealt with and processed, right? And there are so many people that are saving lives, first responders. And guess what? They end up getting PTSD. My gosh, who wouldn't watching someone dead or getting burnt or whatever the circumstances may be? And they go back to the same company that they've spent their entire lives working at for help, for extra payment or resources, and it doesn't always happen. And yeah, that's frustrating when it comes to that. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, there's just so much that goes on that we think of trauma as transactional. We think of it as this one thing happened and now it's in the past, and that's not the way CPTSD works, or the way life works in general. And then we seek out labels, and we want to say, well, am I depressed or not? Like, could I tell you right now, am I depressed? I don't know. Like, I haven't asked my therapist lately, right? Like, I can say that I have experienced depression on and off for many years. I
Mhm.
know that I got a diagnosis maybe 4 years ago. When is it over? I feel better now. My executive functioning is much better, but which medical standard do we use to say, am I currently depressed or not? And it's not so much that you need that label of I'm depressed or not. It's like, do I need support or not? Yeah, I absolutely still need support. I still come out of therapy appointments feeling like I've gotten something. And I feel like the whole um, Western medical system is based on this need to peg a label to something, make it very transactional. Okay, so if you have this diagnosis, you get 8 treatments, or you can have these, you have your choice of this medication or this other thing, and that's it, and we're done. And that's not the way it is. You need someone to support you through certain things, and trained people who can support you are hard to find often. And especially people who will understand. Like, when my therapist would tell me, yes, that was sexist, I don't think most men would have had the awareness to say that. And the fact
Mhm.
that she had not only been in my industry, but used to work for the same company as me, was very useful, because she could read between the lines on a
Mhm.
lot of things I was saying that somebody else might not have picked up on. So yeah, I think there is just this whole set of issues in front of us. And with COVID and restricted interactions with other people, so many people have experienced anxiety and all sorts of other traumas that we just aren't dealing with as a society. And we're just ignoring them and saying, well, now we're going out, and a lot of us are going out without masks. And I, this morning at Pilates, I was the only person in a mask. And that has been happening more and more. I'm the only one with a mask on, and that's traumatic for me. I don't know what it does. Is it reminding other people in the room of, the past couple of years that they're trying to forget? Is it traumatic for them to see me in a mask? I don't know, but I have asthma, and I'm going to keep wearing a mask because
Mhm.
I can't afford to catch a cold. I can't afford to catch flu. I can't afford to catch COVID, because I don't know how sick I will be. And that would create more trauma for me. I already have enough trauma. I don't need any more.
Yeah, you know what? I'm a carefree person, very similar to you. As long as I'm not hurting any animals, anybody, I get to do what feels right for me. And for you, it maybe wearing the mask because you know the consequences of getting sick. Maybe the person next to you doesn't really fully get it. Maybe they think you have a cold. What they think does not define what you believe or your reality, right? And I wish so many of us could be carefree. Carefree but caring, if that makes sense.
Yes,
Carefree to
I
be
love
who we
that.
want to be,
Yeah.
carefree to do what we want. And I've always given examples of my podcast. When I first started it was very hard. If you go back to my first episode, it's like I'm squeaking and barely talking. Why? Because I had fears. That's how I was brought up to shut up, to listen, to do what I told. And everything I've been told throughout my life isn't necessarily true, and I had to decide that for myself. When it comes to all of us, is understanding what our truth is, and to not let other people define our truth and happiness for us.
Yeah.
Yes, you're right. Maybe it's traumatic, but that's not your responsibility because none of us created the pandemic. Therefore, we do what we want. Oh man, during the pandemic, what a shit show. I'm like, oh my gosh, the court system is freaking backed up with mask issues and so and so. It's like there were so many of us who came together, which I still see and love. And so many of us took the time out of their time to tear people apart. I'm like, are we happy? Those people who do that, I'm like, are you happy now? Are you happy with yourself? In the long run, it catches up with people.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you're giving excellent examples of befriending dragons where you've got these things, these societal expectations, and you can choose how you respond to them. Do you follow their expectations? Do you say, hey, this is my interpretation of your expectations? Or do you just say, whatever, I'm doing what I'm doing. I don't even need to give you any explanation or any path to see me. Those are your choices. When you truly befriend your dragons, you have that freedom, you have that ability to decide how you want to show up in the world, and then you know, depending on the responses you get, you may modify here or there, but you get to decide.
Yeah, yeah. An example for me is being diagnosed with schizophrenia. I shared a video on that. Um, I've always seen it as a beast, as a bad thing that happened to me. And based on that, there were individuals who called me psycho, crazy, and who are scared of me. I'm like, what? It's like it's as if we choose to have things like that happen to us. Does a cancer patient choose to have cancer? Hell no. Why should people make me believe that I choose to have schizophrenia or depression, right? And that's something I advocate quite a bit about. And I know within the work that you do, I can now see it's not only relating to mental health issues. We need advocacy all over the place, everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the big mistakes I've made in my life, one of the things that, if I could go back and change them, a lot of it was how I treated other people and myself when there was any sort of illness, whether it was a mental health illness, whether it was a learning disability. My mom died from breast cancer in the 90s. And, I think there were parts of me looking back that thought, well, why doesn't she just do this? And why didn't she get that treatment? And why? And I didn't blame her on purpose, but there were parts of me that did. And part of that's just my own issues. I was 28 years old. My mom was dying. Like, none of it was fair. All of these things were going on. And that's actually also the first time I used the term befriending dragons was when I got my own breast cancer diagnosis, and I felt relief. I'm like, what in the world? Why am I relieved I have breast cancer? And it took me a while to work through it, but it was the dragon in that case was when my mom died from breast cancer 20 years ago. I'm going to get breast cancer and I'm going to die too. And instead, what I got was the doctor saying, you have breast cancer, but don't worry, it'll be cured in 6 weeks, because they caught it so early that they just did surgery and it was gone. I actually have a lower chance of breast cancer now because most people who get it only get it once. I have no genetic variation. So like all of that relief was before I knew that it was going to be cured, before I knew that I didn't have any genetic variations. Because I was like, oh, the moment has arrived. The thing I've been dreading has arrived. I don't have to worry about it anymore.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, sorry to hear about your mom. My adopted mom passed from cancer, I think over 12 years ago.
Mm.
And I'm so happy you brought this topic up because it's something I wanted to touch on. Any cancers in general. Can you share what was it like for you being diagnosed? And I can only imagine what that was like.
Well, it was interesting because I had a mammogram where they saw a shadow.
Mm,
And so they sent me for extra tests. They sent me for a second mammogram. They sent me for an ultrasound, and they said, it must have like literally just been a shadow. It was a bad mammogram. Just we'll be more careful to. I have what they call very dense breasts.
mm,
And so it's really hard to get mammogram pictures when they can't squish your breast flat enough.
mhm,
And so I was like, whatever. But I thought, well, maybe now is the time to go for genetic testing. And a lot of people are like, oh, well, we need to worry about this. And why doesn't everybody get tested? But they wouldn't do a test until I saw three people. I had to see a genetic counselor who explained all the pros and cons of getting tested. I had to see a medical oncologist who explained a lot of the processes and statistics and, all of these other things that were going on. And then I had to see a breast cancer surgeon who looked at my mammograms and went, what? This doesn't make any sense. I can see your mammograms for the last 10 years and there's no shadow. And now there's a shadow. And he kind of looked at it from a couple different angles. And he said, are you willing to have me do a physical exam? I said, sure. I had one of my friends in the room, so she's holding my hand.
mhm,
And he took his thumb and put it in my breast and said, I bet it's right here. And he put I swear his entire thumb went all the way and he went, there it is. There's the lump. And
mm,
so I think what happened there is what happens quite often. We have all this fear. We avoid something. So I've been avoiding the genetic counseling for years.
mm,
Now, it's luck. Like that lump had not been there very long. If I'd had the genetic counseling a year earlier, it probably would have been before they could feel the lump. And
mm,
so, the timing ended up being right. But so often we put off these things that might tell us something bad is going to happen. We avoid the thing. We avoid going back for the second mammogram. We avoid asking for when the digital tomography came out, a bunch of people avoided it because it was more extensive. Your breast has to be squished into that very uncomfortable thing for longer. Their things are moving around and rotating. I've had ultrasounds now on a regular basis, and that's a new standard. People avoid all of these things. So all of that to say, cancer sounds like this big, scary thing. If breast cancer is caught in the very early stages, it has a well over 95% cure rate. Yet most people think of it as, I'm not going to go have a mammogram. I might find out I have cancer and therefore I'm going to die. Well, I mean, I have friends that have had or still have breast cancer, and it is devastating if it can't be cured. I am not minimizing that in any way. But for most of us, if we go and we have the checks, if we have the pap smears and we have the exams and we pay attention to the lab test,
mhm,
many of these things can be treated, and it's not this big scary thing
mhm.
for everyone. Now, for some people, it is. I'm not minimizing that, but we can't avoid getting tested, and we can't avoid treatments that are proven because we're scared.
You're right. Most of us, we do an excellent job at avoiding our issues
Right.
until it's too late. Not avoidance don't necessarily mean this person is a bad person. Okay, I look at it from so many different angles. Maybe it's trauma. In your case, your mom had it. Obviously, you're gonna fear and you don't want to deal with it because one, it might bring emotions that you do not want to feel again. It's been so long. Why feel it again? Why walk in her steps,
Yes.
right? And some of us we ignore things out of ignorance because we don't want people to see us weak, sick, and vulnerable. When we are vulnerable, we feel that we're less than or we're weak, which is far from the truth. That's why I always echo on the podcast, vulnerability is strength, it's power, because you know what's wrong, and you're saying, yes, this is wrong. That's how it makes me feel, and that's what I'm going to do about it. And that's power. My aunt, she passed in 2020 from breast cancer, and it was in Haiti, which there isn't much studies or medications. They don't have the technology that there is here. So that's what she passed from. That's also something I love to talk about. I've had two people I love that are gone by cancer. You're right, there's the stigma around it, not only mental health issues. And it's the mentality. As soon as someone is diagnosed, I'm going to die. Really, though? No, you're going to live if you choose to fight, if you choose to live. And what we say, we truly manifest. It comes to life.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a whole lot there about, when we go into looking for options and seeking out what's going to work for us, whether that's treatment or just being comfortable, inviting our friends in. And there are studies that show that our attitude does affect our body, the way that we think about our positivity. And I'm not a fan of going overboard on the positivity. I think a lot of coaches in particular can get kind of toxic on that. But there's a certain amount of, we can show up as, I'm going to look for things, and it is physically reflected in our bodies. And that's why there's such a strong placebo effect for so many things. They've even shown that some surgeries, there's a placebo effect. There was a study on knee surgery where if they just opened up the knee for a particular type of knee problem, they saw the same results as if they actually did the underlying repair, because we're telling our body, somebody cares, somebody's paying attention, I'm paying attention, and things are getting fixed. And that doesn't happen in every case. That there are things that we can't solve, but that attitude and that accepting options and looking at it as things are going to get better, that can be very useful.
You're right. Yeah. I've talked to lots of mindset coaches, and yeah, you're right. Sometimes it's a little bit too much positivity. Not that it's wrong, it's just knowing when to pull back a little bit, because even though we're coaching people, we want the absolute best for them. That does not mean they're in the same headspace or mindset that we are. It's learning to listen and learning when to speak as well, right? Um, yeah, you were talking about avoidance. We touched a little bit about that. I swear I had a really good question to ask you. It just went,
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's so much here. I mean, you're asking such great questions. You have such great things that you're talking about, so many great stories as well. So, and there's so much swirling around in my head that it's easy to think about, oh, I want to follow these 8,000 paths and write down a note, and then it's gone. So yay, we're human.
Yeah, well, it happens. In my video about schizophrenia, I mentioned that to people. That's a very common thing that happens among many of us who's diagnosed with it. Sometimes I'm talking, like it just happened now. I had a question, it was there, and my mind went completely blank.
Yeah.
What do I
And
do? Yeah, I'm just honest about it, right? And I
right.
appreciate
And
your response.
anxiety can cause that. And we're still living through an endemic now. It's no longer a pandemic, it's an endemic. We're still living through COVID. I'm 54, and I am, hopefully in October I'll be fully in menopause. And that's a side effect of menopause, is forgetting things and not being able to remember what you just said 2 seconds ago. Aging. So there are all sorts of reasons that we may not remember what we're talking about at any moment. And I think that's another stigma thing. People are like, oh, well, there's something wrong with you because you couldn't remember that. No, there's nothing wrong. That's just a normal part of being human.
Yeah, yeah. When people say that, I wish I could take them and put them in my mind. for even half a second, they would scream and escape.
Right.
Right? Yeah, you're talking earlier about mindset. And mindset is so important. Um, Again, it's easy to push it to too much positivity, but it's good to look at it, because I believe that we carry trauma in so many parts in our body. An example, I have chronic back issues, among other issues. Um, it's been so much better because I'm not paying attention to it. Not that it's not there, because I talk to people, they ask me, how am I doing? I'm fine. And the back pain, I'm fine as well. And if they didn't ask me, I wouldn't even think about it. Not that it's not there. I choose to put my attention in positive places that are going to benefit me in the long run.
Yeah, and I think that's a great way to look at it. And I think about, I had a hip injury earlier this year, and the physical therapist was like, "Well, I don't know exactly what's wrong in there, but it almost doesn't matter what's wrong in there. What matters is the muscles around that area are weaker than they could be. Let's work on strengthening those muscles."
Mhm.
And because I had been babying it for several months between the injury and when I actually went to see a physical therapist, yeah, my entire leg muscle collection, whatever you call it, they were all weak.
Mhm.
And so I think of that around a lot of the mental issues as well. We don't have to say, I have to understand exactly why I'm forgetting things. I don't have to understand exactly why, when the bully says something, I respond this way. What we can do is strengthen everything around it.
Mhm.
We can grow something else around that. And we can say, when this happens, I'm going to decide to, like you said, just say, here's what happened, just put it down. And, some people might say, well, that doesn't feel authentic to me. I'm going to start taking better notes, or I'm going to, like, whatever it may be. So strengthening those other muscles around it is an accepted practice in physical therapy. So that
Mhm.
could be an accepted practice in coaching or mentoring as well.
Yeah, I think that's one of the many reasons that attracts people to my podcast or to what I do, because I don't know. I'm honest. I tell people, I'm always writing things down, and that attracts people because it's a type of vulnerability that all of us seek to see and understand and have, right? Because we're expected to be perfect, to
Yeah.
walk a straight line, to do everything so well. Where I'm like, hey, I'm gonna have good days and bad days. I used to stutter quite a bit. I'm surprised and love that it's getting better. But people want to see us without any shield or walls. They want to see us in our worst time and good time, and how we uh, communicate and interact with others while we're going through that.
Yeah, and that reminds me of the mindset of, if you are vulnerable, if you tell people what your boundaries are, these are all ways of saying, I'm willing to tell you more about me. I'm
Mhm.
willing to share a little bit more of me. And that makes other people want to share more about themselves. It makes them feel safe. It makes
Mhm.
them go, oh, wait, I can follow her example. And because she created the sense of safety, I feel safe enough to
Yeah.
also do something maybe totally unrelated, but all of a sudden their safety has increased. And
Mhm.
that's a large part of deepening relationships, whether it's friendships, romantic relationships, coworkers, clients, whatever it may be.
Yeah, you're right. Uh, we don't always be given the permission, which I don't think any of us need permission. But let's put it in a way that society looks at it. We're not giving room to screw up. We're expected to be so perfect. And I try to echo that to people. You're not perfect. I just haven't seen it in anyone or in myself. And for us to think that way, it just doesn't make sense. We're in denial of something.
Right.
Mhm.
And we can put all these expectations on a certain group of people that we want ourselves and other people to be perfect. Yet, if we work for a perfectionist, or if there are certain perfectionist expectations, we're like, I don't want to do that. That's wrong. So why would we? There's this thing in the external world that we don't like, that makes us feel bad. Why would we do that to ourselves? Why would we expect perfection? And then there's the whole idea, like Tima Akin popularized the characteristics of white supremacy. And one of the key characteristics of white supremacy is seeking perfection. So when you think about this culture of, are you white enough? Are you male enough? Do you perform those two things in a certain way? That is all based on hierarchical perfection. And when you are seeking this perfection, this never making a mistake, you're doing that because you want to maintain or increase where you're at on the ladder. On, capitalism reinforces this as well. And we talk about career ladders, and a lot of women in particular say they don't climb the career ladder, they kind of swim in circles and gradually go up. And it's still a hierarchy, but ladders don't work for a lot of people who aren't white men. And part of why they don't work is because they uphold white supremacy and patriarchy by their very existence, because they are seeking out this level of perfection or purity of being enough of some artificial standard that looks like the people who framed the Constitution, the people, as a Native American, merciless Indian savages is in the Constitution. It's part of the crimes that King George has supposedly committed against the colonists. And we think about the founding fathers had some very specific ideas about who was human and who wasn't. And my ancestors were not considered human, and were specifically called out as someone that needed to be tamed. I mean, merciless Indian savages specifically means they're non-human to begin with, and they must be eradicated. And they attempted to do that. So, and that's a perfection seeking.
Wow, what a strong woman you are. And thank you for sharing that. I can't say I know what it was like, what it is still like. I can only speak from my point of view of what I've experienced for myself, right? But my heart goes out to anyone who continue to face these injustices. And it's 2023. Regardless of the year, I mean, we're human. Yes, we're different colors, speak different languages, but at the end of the day, it's a life. It's a breathing human being that has so much to offer and give to the world. And it's for me. I always choose to see the soul. I believe the certain backgrounds we're from. Yes, it's so beautiful and authentic and true, and where we're from. But I look at the soul of a person because it's so beautiful. That's the one of the many places we can go to seek and find beauty in a person. But instead, so many of us we retrieve to their imperfections to judge them instead of going to who they actually are. So I thank you for being so brave, for speaking your truth, because so many of us need to speak our truths and we're being silenced for so long. So thank you for doing that.
No, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity, because you created an environment that was safe. You created an environment where I didn't have to be perfect. You created this space for me to be myself, and for other women and everyone out there who's listening of any gender to be able to hear and perhaps accept some new truths for themselves. So I really appreciate all you're doing in the world.
Thank you so much. And I spoke to, I think her name is Laura. She's in the States, and she just shared her story of how she came out and the impact of it. And as I was talking to her, she's like, "You really don't care, do you?" I said, "No, I see you for you. You can choose to love who you want to love. That does not change how I see you." And I'm looking to have more people like her to come to share transgendered and many other people. I see people for who they are, and we fail to see that. We see them based on their actions or the groups that they're from. I've been called black. Where in Africa I'm from? No, I'm not from Africa. I wish people would just see my soul versus the vessel, the outside vessel I have. Yeah. Do you have any final thoughts before we wrap up?
So I work mostly with women in tech, and again, many of the things are generalizable to uh, every other industry, other aspects of life. But I just really strongly encourage women in tech to think about how you want to show up in the world, how you want to uh, show up as a confident person, how you want to show up as somebody who has boundaries that work for you, and how you want to really be valued in life, and how you're going to go about getting that, and understand that you deserve it and you can get there. And if anyone is interested in help along that way, help along that path, befriendingdragons.com is my website. I have some free downloads available on there, 5 steps to up level your career. I have some 10 interview questions to help you find a safe work environment if you're going through an interview process. Several other things on there. So I invite you to visit that site, check it out. I'm happy to talk to you. I talk to a lot of women where all we do is have a 30-minute conversation. They tell their story. We may or may not ever talk again after that, but for a lot of women, that can be life-changing to tell their story to somebody who understands what's going on. And I will not ask you what lawyers you've talked to or any of those other things that used to cause me problems.
Yeah, yeah. Wow. Thank you so much, Cindy, for your time. I have enjoyed this conversation so much.
No, thank you very much.
Mhm.